Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So, by request, today's teamwork build is a Magus. More specifically, we're building a twisting tree Magus. So if we're wielding a staff in one hand, it gains the agile trait, and the damage dice increases to 1d6. If we're wielding our staff in two hands, then it gains the parry, reach, and trip traits. Finally, as a free action when we make a strike, including a spell strike, or at the end of our turn, we can change our grip on our staff, meaning we can go from one-handed to two-handed freely. We also gain the spinning staff conflict spell. For one action, if we're wielding a staff, then we can make a strike against one creature and then make another strike against a different creature. Full attack penalty applies normally. As we level up, we'll also gain the Magic Mouth, Slow, and Blink spells. For our ancestry, believe it or not, we're going with the android. I know it's a rare ancestry, but it really is the best ancestry for this build, and we'll talk about why later on. Our heritage is going to be the Laborer android. This will give us the Athletics skill and the Hefty Holler skill feat. We're not going to have a really high intelligence to start with, and we're going to need quite a few skills for this build. So getting one of the ones we need for free is pretty good. The starting stats for this build should be Strength 18, Dexterity 14, Constitution 10, Intelligence 14, Wisdom 14, and Charisma 8. This build can do a lot, which is why we need so many ability scores. But we're not going to need Charisma at all, so that's why we're taking Android instead of something like Orc or Human. But before we get into the rest of this video, if you're liking what you're seeing, don't forget to like, subscribe, ding that bell, stay caught up on everything I do on this channel. But if you really want to support me, you can pledge to me on Patreon. You can also get some cool perks, including Google Sheets for all my teamwork builds, as well as extra teamwork build videos for team leaders and higher. Anyway, let's get into the feats. So, as a Magus, we only get an Ancestry feat at level 1. And for that Ancestry feat, we're going to go with Nanite Surge. So when we make a skill check that requires 3 actions or fewer, we can use a reaction to gain a +2 status bonus to that skill check. When we use this feat, we also glow in a 10-foot emanation of dim light for 1 round. We'll talk about why we're taking this when I get to the first teamwork report of this video. Since you guys seem to like me doing 2, I'm going to do 1 after we cover level 10. Then at level 2, for our first class feat, we're going to take Expansive Spell Strike. We can now use Spell Strike with spells that target a creature or have an area, instead of just spells that require a spell attack roll. There are a ton of spells that we might want to use for this build that don't require spell attack rolls. It's going to be very helpful to be able to use spells like Slow, Fear, that sort of thing on a spell strike instead of just spells that require spell attack rolls. Plus, if a bunch of enemies are grouped together, guess what? Fireball. Then for our first free archetype feat, we'll take the Cleric Dedication. This will give us a couple of Cleric cantrips. As a Magus, we're not going to have very many spells to begin with, so taking a spellcasting dedication is really going to help. Plus, we're taking this for another reason, but we'll get to that in a second. In the meantime, for our deity, I went with Nethys. But you could pretty much pick any deity you want here, as long as their favorite weapon is the staff, and they have access to the knowledge domain. You gain training in religion, and if you go with Nethys, then you can pick any skill you want, since we're already trained in Arcana due to being a Magus. I'm going to go over most of the general feats at the end of this video, but I do want to cover the one for level 3 right now. At level 3, we will want to take Adopted Ancestry for Human. Not only does this fit our theme, because androids are usually adopted, but it'll give us access to a couple of human feats that we need for this build. Then level 4 is time for Student of the Staff. We gain the crit specialization effect of the club group for our staff, allowing us to push the target up to 10 feet away as forced movement. Also, when we're in Arcane Cascade, our staff gains the deadly D6 trait, with the damage type being the same as our bonus damage from Arcane Cascade. And finally, we can place runes on magic staffs. We have to first put them into our spellbook, taking up 1 page per rune. This functions the same as transferring a rune. You can't inscribe any runes that couldn't be placed on a non-magical staff or the shifting rune. When preparing a staff, you can put any property runes from your spellbook onto that staff up to the number of the weapon potency rune on your staff. In other words, potency runes on a magic staff are now a thing. And so is +1, +2, +3, and striking, greater striking, and major striking. But that part's normal. And now we come to one of the main reasons why we took the cleric dedication. We want to take deadly simplicity. Now, when we're wielding our staff in 2 hands, the base damage is 1d10 instead of 1d8. So, chance for a little extra damage when we're wielding it in 2 hands. Unfortunately, this doesn't increase the damage when we're wielding it in 1 hand, since we're already upping that with our hybrid study. Beating someone over the head with 1d10 damage on a simple weapon is pretty good. Then at level 5, we'll want to increase our strength, dex, intelligence, and wisdom. For our level 5 ancestry feat, we'll pick up Magus' analysis. For 1 action, we can make a recall knowledge check, and if we succeed, we recharge our spell strike. In addition, if we've hit a creature this turn, then we gain a +1 on our recall knowledge. Then that subject is immune to this feat for 1 day. Next is level 6. We're going to take Attack of Opportunity. Since when we're wielding in 2 hands, our staff has the trip trait, we can use it to trip opponents. Then, when they get up, we can hit them with Attack of Opportunity, thus allowing us to do even more damage. Then it's time for Basic Cleric Spellcasting. This will give us the basic spellcasting benefits, which means a 1st and 2nd level cleric spell slots. This will give us a few more spells, which we desperately need because we're a Magus. Then for our 2nd archetype, we're going to take the Investigator dedication. Yes, we are taking this on the class feat side of the free archetype. We gain the On the Case class feature, allowing us to use Pursue a Lead and Clue In. We also become trained in Society and another skill of our choice. Pursue a Lead and Clue In aren't really important here. What's important is the next feat we're going to take. But if you want to use those out of combat, that's fine too. The next feat we're going to take at this level is Investigator's Stratagem. We gain the Devise a Stratagem action, but we can't replace our Strength or Dexterity modifier with our Intelligence. So we choose a creature that we can see, and roll a d20. If we strike that creature later in the round, we must use the d20 we rolled instead of rolling a new natural 20. We can only do this for our first strike of the round and not any subsequent attacks. The downsides of this feat really don't matter. Number 1, we're a Magus. We're going to be putting everything into our first strike of the round. And our strength is going to be higher than our intelligence, so not being able to substitute our intelligence doesn't matter in the slightest. But what this feat does do is allow us to know ahead of time whether our spell strike will actually hit or not. Thus, we won't waste our spell strike. At 9th level, we get an ancestry feat, and we're going to go with Clever Improviser. Because being basically trained in everything is pretty good. And if we have skills that we need that aren't trained, we can get close with this feat. Then at level 10, 15, and 20th, we'll want to increase our Strength, Constitution, Intelligence, and Wisdom. We have enough dex for this build, and we can wear medium armor because we're a Magus. So upping our Con is going to be better here. But we still need to increase our Intelligence and Wisdom for our spells. Our first feat at level 10 is going to be Lunging Spell Strike. For 2 actions, we can make a spell strike with any spell that isn't a cantrip or a focus spell. For this spell strike, our staff's reach increases by 5 times the spell's level. And then we'll take Athletic Strategist. This essentially allows us to devise a stratagem on our trip attempts. So we'll know ahead of time whether our trip attempts will actually hit or not. Okay, you guys seem to like it when I do 2 teamwork reports in these videos, so here's the first one. First, I want to note that nothing in Spell Strike says that we have to use a Mega Spell or even an Arcane Spell. That means we can channel 2-action harm spells into our Spell Strike, or even heal spells if we're going up against undead, thanks to Expansive Spell Strike. In addition, the Divine Spell list has a ton of debuff spells that we can use with our Spell Strike. Some examples that you could take at this level include Agonizing Despair, Blindness, and Charitable Urge. And remember to use Devise a Stratagem before you attack, so you know whether your Spell Strike is going to hit or not. Also, we will want to trip opponents in this build, especially when we have to recharge our Spell Strike. And remember, when they get back up, we can hit them with an attack of opportunity for even more damage. For Nanite Surge, we want to use that on a Recall Knowledge check once per hour, as a +2 on that is going to be extremely helpful. We could also use it on a trip attempt, but then we wouldn't have a reaction for attack of opportunity. But if they're a creature that has high reflex DC, we may want to give up our attack of opportunity to trip them at a +2. Because another party member may have attack of opportunity, and flat-footed is always good, especially for rogues. And remember, we've also got Athletic Strategist, so we can know ahead of time whether a +2 will actually help or not. And with Lunging Spell Strike, we can Spell Strike from up to 25 feet away thanks to Lunging Spell Strike. So we can hit that spellcaster in the back even though there are enemies in front of him. On the turn that we can't Spell Strike, we probably want to do 3 things. We want to recall knowledge about a subject, using Nanite Surge if we can, trip the opponent, and then recharge our Spell Strike. This will allow us to find out if a target is weak to a certain element, to set up our next Spell Strike, and make them flat-footed to everyone else. We also might want to trip the opponent, then attack with our second action so we can take advantage of flat-footed. On the turns we can Spell Strike, we'll devise a stratagem, and then hit them with their weakness if we can. Or hit them with a harm spell if we have access to one, if they don't have a weakness. At level 12, we'll take Domain Initiate. We want the Knowledge Domain here so we can pick up Scholarly Recollection. Yes, this does give us another reaction, but since we can only use Nanite Surge once per encounter, even with our next Ancestry feat, it really doesn't matter as much as you think it does. And what this does is definitely worth it. If we make a Perception check or a Recall Knowledge check with a skill that we're trained in, which at this point we should definitely be trained in all Recall Knowledge skills, we can use a reaction to gain advantage on that check. Then it's time for Experts Cleric Spellcasting. This is just more and higher level cleric spells. For our Ancestry feat at level 13, we'll take Consistent Surge. Now we can use Nanite Surge once every 10 minutes instead of once per hour. Still only once per encounter, but we're able to use this more if we run into multiple encounters in a day. At level 14, we'll pick up Conflux Focus. So when we refocus, we get back 2 focus points instead of just 1. We're going to be using our focus points a lot, so getting them back quicker is always good. Then we'll take our third dedication, the Staff Acrobat dedication. So whenever we jump while wielding our staff, whether that's a high jump, a leap, or a long jump, we gain a +2 bonus on any athletics check required, and we can jump 5 feet further. In addition, we can trip and, more importantly, shove opponents even if we don't have a hand free, as long as we're wielding our staff. And finally, if we roll a success on a check to balance while wielding our staff, we get a critical success instead. It's that shoving, even though we don't have a free hand, that's very good for this belt. We can now push enemies into hazards in the environment, even though we're wielding our staff in 2 hands. but we could already trip with our staff, so that part doesn't matter. At level 16, it's time for Divine Breath. This is just even more spell slots for us. Now we can prepare that harm spell and some of our debuff spells as well. Moving on to free archetype, it's time for Advanced Domain. This will give us the Know the Enemy focus spell. So, for a reaction and a focus point, if we roll initiative and can see a creature, succeed on an attack roll against a creature, or if a creature fails a saving throw against one of our spells, then we can use Recall Knowledge and we gain an advantage on the roll. This one is for in combat, whereas Scholarly Recollection is mainly for out of combat. For our last Ancestry feat at level 17, we'll take Revivification Protocol. For a free action, when we have the dying condition and are about to roll a recovery check, we are restored to 1 hit point and lose the dying and unconscious conditions. We still gain or increase the wounded condition as normal for losing the dying condition in this way. We can also act normally during this turn. This is basically Orc Ferocity, but if we use it right when we go down to 0 hit points, we don't have to waste an action standing back up, which in this build is huge. At level 18, it's time for Conflux Wellspring. When we refocus, we get back 3 points instead of 2. Pretty simple. Then it's Master Cleric Spellcasting for more Cleric spells. And then for our last level, we're going to start with Supreme Spell Strike. We are permanently quickened, but we can only use the extra action to strike or to recharge our Spell Strike. Simple, but very good. And our last free archetype feat is going to be Pivot Strike. For 2 actions, we can leap and then make a strike with our staff. We gain a circumstance bonus to damage equal to twice the weapon's damage dice. Then, regardless of whether you hit or not, you can attempt to trip or shove the opponent. This is for when we run out of spell slots and can't use Spell Strike, because you might face more than one encounter a day. Before we get into the teamwork report, I should talk about the rest of the general feats you want to take. Those are Toughness, Die Hard, Canny Acumen for our reflex saves, and Fleet. For the second teamwork report of this video, it's pretty much the same, except now we have more ways to recall knowledge, and we can shove opponents with our staff. We also have an extra action, so we can recharge our Spell Strike. We're not going to want to use the extra action to strike, because that's going to be at least at a -5. We do have a lot of reactions in this build, and no way to do more than 1 reaction a turn. However, which one you use is ultimately going to depend on the situation. We can only use Nanite Surge once every 10 minutes. That's once per encounter, maybe less. But we can use our Knowledge Domain spells as long as we have the focus points. Which is why we're taking Conflux Focus and Conflux Wellspring. And keep in mind, even if we don't prepare the right spells, we can still funnel our spells into our magic staff that we can use to hit things over the head with, and with our Spell Strike. And we now have Divine Breath, meaning we have 2 spell slots for every level except our highest 2, which means we can prepare harm spells and debuff spells for each level. This build is pretty complicated, so I wouldn't play this build if you're a new player, but otherwise, have at it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, teamwork is vital.